Ben is hitting. So technically we're on right now. There is, I think, a little lag between us and the folks watching us on YouTube. But so hi, everybody that's already out there. You're a couple of minutes early, and that's perfectly fine. We'd rather you be early than late. So welcome. We're going to start the show right at 10 o'clock Central Standard Time. So we got about 4 minutes. So you're 4 minutes early. And George and Julie and I are just talking about, blue Pop-Tarts or something. I don't know what we're talking about. So we had for breakfast. I don't know if I wasn't supposed to announce that. But George, what about you? Did you have breakfast this morning? I know you're still barely awake right now, right?
Good morning.
Good morning. Did you eat breakfast, or did you skip breakfast? Did you get right
No, I get breakfast as soon as I'm done with you.
Okay. So I'm probably not going to be able to hold you over and keep you late, right? You're going to want to get that bacon and eggs right away.
Are we done yet?
No. I'm sorry, George.
Okay.
We'll try and stay on schedule for you because we know you want breakfast.
I hope you get more than a Pop-Tart.
That's pretty good. So I know both of you guys travel around a little bit and you speak, whether it be on a big stage or whether you're teaching a class, or maybe you're teaching your particular folks. Where are your travels taking you next, Miss Julie Jones?
Oh boy, 2020 is shaping up to be a really busy year. Even more outreach with our own panel, more outreach with appraisers at large, just kind of informing them of everything that's going on in the industry, but lots of exciting stuff. But I think my first stop is actually in DC. I have to look at my schedule.
Great.
All right, you know what? I take that back. I'll be visiting our Troy office the first week in January.
Oh, very nice. In January. Okay.
In Detroit.
In Detroit. Well, that's okay. George, where are you going to be?
Well, headed to Sacramento and Portland and Seattle and Ohio and South Florida. Going to be doing a class down near Miami area in March.
Very cool. Well, George was nice enough to let me rope him down and do a little podcast yesterday. We recorded that after our test, which was very cool. And those watching right now, that'll be coming out, in a couple of weeks or so. And I told George, I might be interested in coming and taking your class. The Florida one sounds more inviting to me, but Ohio is probably a little closer to me. So I don't know. I'll just have to take a look at your schedule. And I promise, if you don't heckle me today, I won't heckle you in class. So that's our deal, right? We're gonna play nice. No, I'm just teasing. So we're about 1 minute away. George, you still appraise property occasionally, right? I know you do some litigation work, but you're not just an instructor. Is that a fair statement?
Well, that's absolutely true. I do mostly litigation work and mostly residential.
Great. And I know, Julie, you have a background working for a big company that we all used to, at least the lending community, used to sell their mortgages to. Is that a fair statement?
That is fair. I worked for Fannie Mae for about 8.5 years. And prior to that, I was out in the field for about 10 years as a residential appraiser.
Great. Very good. Well, we're super excited to have both you on, and we've got a kind of an interesting topic today as we wind down 2019 and look ahead to see where we're going in the new year. So we're excited that you're here. It is 10 o'clock, so it's time to get started, if that's okay. Good morning, appraisers. I'm Bryan Reynolds. You're watching the Appraisal Report webinar brought to you by Appraiser eLearning. Guys, we're super glad you're here. I hope this show is informative. The best part is it's free, so it doesn't cost you anything. If you're a busy appraiser, which we're all very busy appraisers, if you've got to hop off and answer a phone call or do a revision for one of those clients, or maybe you even have an appointment later this morning that you're going to miss the second half, these sessions are all recorded. And so we are recording this live broadcast. and it's normally available pretty quick after the live broadcast via YouTube. So that being said, if you haven't already, go ahead and hit the subscribe button right now. I'm going to give you a second. Okay, your second's up. Go ahead and hit subscribe. That way you're going to be in the know when we have an upcoming broadcast. You will be aware of it. We're glad that you're here. We give you the opportunity to ask questions, and we will answer as many, if not all of those questions during this broadcast. So again, thank you for being here, and thank both my guests for being here. And speaking of my guests, I have two, as you can see on your screen, Mr. George Dell, an M-A-I-S-R-A-S-A, and something else you told me last night, C-R-A, I believe. George, go ahead and say hi to the viewers and introduce yourself. Tell everybody what you do.
Well, I'm George Dell. I do appraisals, mostly litigation work, and I love teaching. And by an accident of life, I ended up getting a huge amount of education in economics and statistics and a whole bunch of stuff. And the one thing I will take credit for is I learned and suffered through a whole bunch of stuff that appraisers don't need to learn.
Okay. So in part not to do. Is that, you can tell them what not to do. All right.
Exactly.
Cool. Miss Julie Jones is working over at Class now. She has been in the business for a little bit. And Julie, welcome to the show, and tell everybody who you are and what you do.
Hey there. Thanks for having me. Julie Jones. I'm the Senior Vice President of Valuation, Transformation, and Engagement at Class Valuation.
Woo. Glad you said
Long
that.
title, but I usually have to take a deep breath before I say it. In short, what I do is I engage with our appraiser panel, also appraisers at large, just letting them know what's not only going on at Class, but what's going on in the industry. Lots of training to support our initiatives. Previously, I was at Fannie Mae for 8.5 years, and then out in the field as a residential appraiser and realtor for about 10 years.
Very cool. Well, thank you both again for being here. As Julie said, she was with Fannie Mae, so she kind of knows, you know, the Fannie Mae guidelines pretty good. She was a practicing appraiser, and you still have your credential, right? You're still an appraiser.
I do, North Carolina.
So you've got a day with 3 appraisers. Welcome to the show, guys, and I'd like to thank everyone for joining in. And as we walk through this webinar today, I'd like to just remind you, as well as some of the viewers, we have more than just appraisers watching, okay? So when we talk in our appraisal lingo, if you don't mind, every once in a while, break that down to somewhat an elementary version, because we have trainees watching, we have folks that are thinking about entering the profession watching, we have AMCs, we have bankers, we have regulators, we have investigators, we have underwriters, we have attorneys. So we have a pretty wide audience of participants, and keep in mind that it's not just appraisers, okay? So I'm gonna give a little insight into how this day happened with my 2 guests. It'll just take a second, and then we'll dive right into the subject matter. So I'm not a huge social media guy. I've got my staff takes care of some of that for me, but I will get on LinkedIn a little bit because it's more business oriented, right? It's not as much social, it's more business. And Mr. Dell posted an article, and there it is. And just to give Mr. Dell a little plug, he did, I guess, George, it's a whole series of articles, right? Because this was part 5.
That one was, I think I was 5 parts or even 6.
Okay, so this one is entitled Hybrid Appraisals Part 5, and I printed out a couple of the other ones. What is a hybrid, right? So you guys can go back and read those. It's pretty good information. But anyway, George wrote this, and I will reference this a little bit today. And he got several comments, one of which was Miss Julie Jones. And Julie said, George, you don't know what you're talking about. No, she did not say that. He's got the police coming after him here. So
That might be me.
Okay.
I'm gonna mute until I have to speak.
So Julie, I'm not going to read all this. You guys can go back and research it and find it. But she was very professional. She said, George, you raised some fair points. But then she goes on to talk about, what about a scenario where maybe there's extremely low risk, okay? And again, I'm not going to read it verbatim. That's the gist of it. And then George actually sent back and say, Julie, I'm not sure you and I disagree. And I'm like, gosh, dang it, I wanted them to, because, you know, I've always wanted to say, let's get ready to rumble, you know, that. And I thought it would be great. And I actually did make a comment. I said, George, Julie, I think this is a great topic, and I think a lot of appraisers would like to have a conversation about this. Why don't you guys come on the show and we'll duke it out, or not really, we'll talk it out. And I think they're more in agreement than we thought, and probably I'm somewhere in the middle. Okay, so let's get into it. Let's talk about it. And I think as I travel around the country lecturing and being next to appraisers, you know, I was in Florence, Kentucky. I was in Owensboro teaching last week, and then right before that, I was in Florence, Kentucky. Then I ended up in Johnson City, Tennessee, Bowling Green, Kentucky, and then in Murfreesboro. Now I finally got to come home. But, you know, as we start talking about hybrids or bifurcation and that kind of thing, most of the appraisers are starting to seem to be a little bit more willing to talk about bifurcation if it's appraiser related, right? So, you know, we're going to work on a project together, George, right? You and I are going to team up and do it together. Or the three of us will team up and all three of us do it together. So just real quickly, and I don't care, I'll let Julie go first this time. Just explain to the folks that are watching, what is a bifurcation? What is bifurcated appraisal? And
sure. Well, first I'll start and I'll just say, this is what I do like about social media and platforms like LinkedIn. Like, to your point, LinkedIn is a more professional social media platform, and I go there a lot. So where you may have some of the negative on social media, you do have something that can be really positive. And so it opens up the discussion and creates some transparency among the community. So that's what I really love about it. Bifurcated, to answer your question, bifurcation is, if you look that up in the dictionary, it's truly the splitting of two processes. Unfortunately, when all of this came about and this new process came about, there was not a more creative way of describing it. It truly is a split process. So you have one person that's out there doing the inspection as we know it today on the property. So we call those property data collectors. And then you have the appraiser that's actually doing a desktop appraisal based off of the information provided by that person that's collected the data at the subject property. I think it's important to start out today's webinar by saying not every bifurcated product is the same. Just like with all things, we can't paint things with a broad brush stroke, right? So there's different flavors of, you know, who's actually collecting that data. But from what I've seen in the industry, it's always an appraiser that's doing that desktop portion. And I'm speaking broadly of what I've seen at large in the industry.
Okay, very good. So I do a little bit of bifurcated appraisal work. You know, we just did 50 schools for rent surveys. We appraised 9 schools. And, you know, I have he's a genius. He does regression. And he came over and helped me with those. And so we collaborated on that. If I was going to appraise the Opryland Hotel, you better believe I would assemble an entire army of appraisers to try and do that, right? It's a complex assignment. We historically have not thought of doing that on the residential side because, quite frankly, the fee doesn't seem to justify that. But if there's a way to figure that fee out, and I think we have, we do split that out. So bifurcation means nothing more than separating the process. All right, I'm going to do one part, you're going to do another part. And so, George, what are your thoughts if it's an appraiser? In other words, I have a certified residential appraiser, and I send them out to go do the inspection. They capture all that data, hopefully with some electronic device, and ship it up to the cloud. And then they're going to go off to look at their next property to appraise while I'm the analytical nerd, right? I like to sit in and don't measure in the snow, and that's not really me, but I'm pretending. So I want to stay in and crunch the numbers and run regression or depreciated costs or paired sales or whatever I want to do. And I do this part. And then the next one, same thing. He's going to go look at another property. I'm going to crunch the numbers. How do you feel about that, George?
Well, all I can say is when I had an office with 6 or 7 residential appraisers, and I trained a lot of people, I had a great arrangement, and had the time to train them properly. And I always thought that I should be in control of who I send out on what type of job, depending on how difficult I see the job as being. And I thought that the profession was going to go that way. Well, over the years, the profession has not gained control over the product. We've lost control. And I really see this hybrid situation as the market, the GSEs, the Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac in particular, trying to improve the product that we're giving them. And what they really care about is risk.
Right.
And particularly with technology, which is my thing, you know, we're continuing to give an opinion of value 2 weeks ago, a point value. And what our clients really care about is risk. If they're a collateral or lender, they want to know what's the risk of loss. If they're an investor, what's the risk of not making the money they wanted? Then there's the equity clients, certainly like tax collectors in most litigation, where the judge is trying to come up with a fair value. And actually, just recently I've come to terms with the fact that there's a fourth type, which is people who are buying a property for use, like homeowners. And they're the ones we're neglecting the most. So a hybrid, if I'm an appraiser and I can choose which of my trainees or assistants is doing that particular job, that's the right way to do it.
Yeah, so that's something for appraisers to think of, what you just said, you know, and one of the issues, and maybe Julie, you can kind of give us some insight in this. You know, it used to be that I could send a trainee out and the trainee could do the inspection for me, and that would be bifurcated, right? I'm going to use my trainee who I've trained, who has an associate or trainee license issued by the state, so they've had at least some education required. And once I feel competent and that they're competent and they feel comfortable, I'll turn them loose, right? So why doesn't the lending community, you know, I think since the housing crisis, there's been a no, by God, we want you as the appraiser to go out there. Well, I can only look at so many, you know, 3 people are better than 1, right? So Fannie Mae allows it, USPEP allows it, the states allow it. What's the pushback with the lending community? Why aren't they wanting us to do that? And how do they think we'll send a real estate agent or an insurance agent out to do it, but we're not going to let a trainee do it? Do you have any insight for me on that? Because I struggle.
I do. That's you gave me some layers there. So
first ask open-ended questions. I mean,
there's a lot of layers there. So you're exactly right. Both GSE guidelines do allow the use of trainees. They're very specific about those guidelines of who signs on the left-hand side versus the right-hand side of the report, et cetera, et cetera. Lending community, if you think about it, they are just like the rest of us. They're resistant and slow to change too. And so that's where we, to your point, that's where we have found some pushback. We 100% promote the use of trainees. You did see, you know, I would even say pre-crisis, I had a really hard time finding somebody to train me. And that's what a lot of, you know, trainees find. And, you know, the old argument for appraisers was that, you know, why am I going to invest my time and energy to somebody who's going to leave me? That's an old argument. It's a tired argument, quite frankly, because, you know, as we think about it now, we do know that we have an aging appraiser population, and so many things can be learned from both parties. Like, so from your supervisory appraiser to your trainee, you're getting that expertise of years being out in the field. And then that trainee, a lot of times you're talking about someone who is probably more tech savvy and can actually get an office up to speed with technology, making things much more efficient. So I 100% agree with you that there is still a resistance to trainees, but it's not in the secondary market. It's not with AMCs. It's really the lending community, and still we're getting some pushback from the appraisal community as well. I have started to see the tides turn as I talk to some appraisers in larger offices, and they're bringing on trainees. We do know from the records that we've seen that there's a lot of states that are seeing increases in people sitting for the test. So that's exciting news too. As I move over to your next phase of questions of why would a lender accept some other third party going out to collect that data versus a trainee, I want to split that apart a little bit. So you do see that in some cases. In some cases of bifurcation, you do see like a real estate agent, notary, some third party that's going out there and collecting that data. That's not all bifurcated, but I do want to stress that those are pilots. The difference between pilot and policy is pilots are test and learn, and they have to be vetted, and it's a small population of low risk loans where they're trying to test and learn and vet these theories, right? Doesn't mean that they actually get pushed to policy. And so on a grander scale, you're not seeing a third party going out there collecting the data. You do see it. Yes, it's absolutely prevalent. But I 100% support appraisers being out there to collect that data. And those appraisers being trained properly to go out there and have construction knowledge, to know how to measure that property, and to be given tools that helps bridge that gap in cases where maybe that trainee or that appraiser is not as proficient out there in the field.
Yeah, so everyone just heard it. Julie Jones said, I support appraisers being a PDC, right? Is that what I heard?
That's correct.
I just want to get that on.
And you know what? If I can tack on just a little bit, and this is just me and my little soapbox just for a second, I hear a lot of arguments on social media that, you know, AMCs are the ones that are pushing the use of third parties to collect data. And that is just so nonsensical to me, because we are appraisal management companies. We manage the appraisal process. We have large panels of appraisers. That's a built-in labor force. It's nonsensical to me. That's my soapbox. In.
Yeah. All right. I think you got that point across. We do have some questions coming in, and those of you asking questions, good job. Keep it up. We'll get to some of those questions in just a minute, but I don't want to come off my role right now, if you will. All right, so we talked about appraiser to appraiser bifurcation. I think the biggest push is where I call it a hybrid, where it's a non-appraiser going out and doing that. And both of you alluded a little bit to that. I think the term is a PDC, right? It's property data collection. Some people say property data collector. It's whatever you want to call it. It's someone other than the appraiser that's developing the opinion of value, that's going out to the property. Now, why do we go to a property in the first dang place? We go to a property to gather relevant characteristics, right? How many bedrooms does it have? How many bathrooms does it have? What's the condition of the interior or exterior of that property? What's around that property? It's all about gathering data, right? So is it possible that a non-appraiser can gather that data and do it in a decent fashion? I have mixed feelings with it. I have mixed feelings about this. So George, I think this is where maybe we all three may disagree a little bit. I don't know what's going to happen here, folks. But let me ask you this, George. If I sent someone out to a house, a non-appraiser, and maybe we tried to give them some sort of little training, right? And I put a body cam on, made them hold a video camera, and I had an audio voice recorder. They walked through this house, really real time, just like our viewers are watching us right now. We could be watching what this PDC is walking through looking at. And if we're not happy, we say, hey, I'd like to see the ceilings. In fact, when you open the closet door, look up at the ceiling so I can see, because people will paint their ceiling, they forget to paint the ceiling of the closet. So I want to see what's in there, right? And I don't know, is it impossible to gather enough information that we can get credible assignment results with sending a non-appraiser out there to do it? What say you, George?
You know, I remember remembering a specific case that I went out on, and it's an area in San Diego where we have some soils problems, not big. And I remember looking in the closets, which I always did, and I noticed that there was a whole bunch of stuff piled up against one corner of this closet. And I looked over my shoulder to make sure that the homeowner wasn't looking at me, and I scooted this stuff over. There was this big crack there, and it was a serious enough. It was like almost a half-inch crack. It was a serious problem.
They were hiding it.
That comes from experience and having a nose for looking for things. Another situation in my class, I have a neighborhood here in San Diego called Mira Mesa. It's a very homogeneous neighborhood, a lot of homes all the same. And this one example, we spent almost 45 minutes on in my class, and it's a subject property, or actually a comp that is just way out. We do a scatter graph of the whole neighborhood, price versus living area, and everything fits. And this one is like way below. And I say, okay, everybody in the class, put on your appraiser hat and tell me why this one could possibly have sold as low as it did. And the point of this is that if I'd sent an assistant out to do the house across the street, this is my best comp, but it's old. It was 2 years before. But here's the things that come out. It's across the street from a shopping center. It's on a curve in the street. Here we are in semi-arid San Diego, and on wet winters, there's actually a spring that comes up through this Mira Mesa area, and the teenage boys like skid around on the wet area, so it's noisy. There's a power line in back. There's the two busy streets, and suddenly, wow, that's a legitimate sale price, and yet it's way below everything else. And if I had sent somebody out to do the house across the street and didn't use this comp because it was more than a year old, I'd have been about $30,000 too high on the appraisal.
Yeah.
Now, how do I avoid that? And this is what I teach is, well, you do this simple graph. It takes literally 30 seconds, 2 minutes to do a preliminary analysis that helps me decide whether a trainee or somebody else can do an adequate job on that. Or I can still send them out as that, okay, figure out why this one was so low. It's across the street that sold 2.5 years ago.
Yeah, and really.
Can I make a clarification there?
Sure.
So that clarification, I'm a little confused because we're talking about PDCs actually doing an appraisal, and that's not what's happening at all. PDCs, property data collectors, can be appraisers. And in most cases right now, what we see in these pilot programs, they are appraisers. It's just a split from the person that's doing the desktop. And so that argument there of why that comp sold lower in the neighborhood, as a desktop appraiser, you know your market. And you know that, from doing your analysis, you know that one would be outside of, the rest of them for a reason. You have the geographic competency. So it's not the person that's actually collecting that data.
Yeah, I think what we're talking about or focusing on right now is the person going out just collecting property characteristics. And so let's back up just a second. We've got a lot of questions coming in already, and we're going to get to some of those. George, one of the things in that first article I know it's not the first one, it's part 5. Okay, and maybe this is part of what you were talking about. You say an important part of appraiser training was the field work. You go on to talk about driving the neighborhood. Both are needed, okay? And so can you elaborate on that statement that an important part of appraiser training was the field work?
Well, I think kicking the dirt is the main part of learning things.
Okay.
I mean, we're human beings, we're visual. We need to see and do things and hear and smell. And being out there in the field is how you connect that to concepts on a form or on a
Sure.
dashboard on a screen.
Sure. Yeah. You know, all three of my kids played soccer, and you know, I played football and baseball. I didn't know how to play soccer, and one day no coach showed up, and you had 14 little kids sitting around in a circle with all their little soccer balls. So I just jumped in and said, kick the ball, you know. So the next week they're like, Bryan, guess what? You're the coach. I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. But what I wanted to do, George, since I had no idea, I wanted to take some training. I wanted to learn how, you know, you don't kick with the pointed part of your toe because it's pointed and the ball's round. It go. So I took some training. And the interesting thing is they came to do a clinic in my little town, and they said, bring your coat and bring a ball. I was married at the time. My wife said, don't forget your ball. And I said, they're not going to make us old 40-year-old guys run around in the snow kicking a ball. Well, guess what they did? They made us run around and kick a ball in the snow. And they said the best way to learn the game, the best way to coach the game is to learn how to play the game. So we were out there running around. So I don't totally disagree with that statement. But again, let's remember that we're talking about that separation of bifurcated versus, you know, two different parts here. Let's actually get to a few of these questions because, I mean, our clock is going quick, and I know George wants to eat breakfast, but if I could twist those arms just a little bit, maybe keep you a few minutes longer than we're supposed to, I think our viewers would greatly appreciate that. We've got a couple hundred folks watching live. So I know you're both busy people, but I'm going to try and steal just a hair more of your time if I can. So are you guys up for a few questions? Can we get some of these knocked out?
Sure.
Let's do it.
All right. Spencer says, what do you say about the states removing the appraiser's license for completing the bifurcated appraisal assignments? If the appraiser is USPAP compliant, how is the appraiser verifying data collected? Whichever one of you want to take that one.
So I'm assuming Spencer's talking. There's been some recent chatter about some of the bifurcated products out there. There's been one recently that really got a lot of attention, and I do have to say, when I reviewed that complaint, it was pretty egregious. So I'll leave that there.
Okay.
To Spencer's point, it is the appraiser's responsibility to remain USPAP compliant. And so if a form as a desktop appraiser has been provided to you and it doesn't contain all of the certifications, assumptions, and limiting conditions in that form that you need to be USPAP compliant, then you're going to have to supplement that. One thing that I can just speak personally from, and then I'll let George take over, is, you know, whenever we put out a new product, whether it's, you know, a bifurcated product, something completely different, something outside of the norm of what an appraiser is accustomed to doing for us, there's a whole training that goes into that. The more information I can give appraisers, the better. So how to remain USPAP compliant. So for example, on some of these bifurcated products where you have the appraiser as the property data collector, that's considered appraisal practice by USPAP. It's not the communication of assignment results. And so the appraiser's not bound by scope of work. The appraiser's not bound by record keeping. They're bound by ethics and competency. And so all of that can also be found in AO 21. So for me, it's more information that I can give to that appraiser, the better. It's ultimately up to the appraiser to be USPAP compliant and decide what's comfortable for them and what works best in their business.
Yeah, so I'm going to ask a two-part question now because these things are coming in quick, okay? And as Julie said, Advisory Opinion 21 will help you with that. I've been referencing Advisory Opinion 21 for probably as long as it's been out, a long time. And it's the one that has the circles, okay? And What Julie's talking about is you would be in the white circle. The most center circle is the black circle, and you're an appraiser acting as an appraiser. You're doing an appraisal or appraisal review. The next circle, or oval really, if we want to get technical, is white. And in that oval, you're not doing an appraisal or appraisal review, but you're doing something else in the capacity of an appraiser. So there's that expectation. You still have your appraiser hat on. So whether you're writing an article or maybe doing a webinar with me, or, you know, being interviewed by the newspaper, providing a measuring service as an appraiser, then you do have those obligations, which is your definitions and your preamble. And as Julie said, the ethics rule and the competency rule, all those still apply to you. The most outer circle would be where you take your appraiser hat off and you're working as a real estate agent or a tax representative. Your only obligation there is to not misrepresent. Let's get to a couple other questions. And George, I'll start with you. I know Julie may have to jump in at the bottom of this too for her company, but Matt, I'm going to ask two because they're similar. Matt is asking that I have found, or maybe Matt's making a statement. I have found that data collectors are not trained properly. And then we have another question. Oh my Lord, we have a ton of questions.
They're coming in.
Yeah, what is the responsibility and liability of the data collectors? George, you have any insight if we were using PDC?
Absolutely, yeah. That was my first question. If we start using data collectors, then there's going to be good data collectors and bad data collectors. Well, then how do we make sure everybody's, well, we've got to have licenses for data collectors.
Okay.
And you know where that goes. I mean, do I need to
maybe I should teach a class on that, George? Brilliant.
Yeah, and then, well, then we need regulators, and we need a uniform standards of professional data collection.
Yeah. My head's exploding.
Well, yeah.
Julie, what's your thought on the training? I mean, where, you know, George brings up a lot of good points there. You know, we're just going to throw anybody on the street and say, congratulations, you are a PDC. Go look at it.
Yeah, you know, I mean, in my former life at my former employer, I saw some things that were deficient, when it comes from property data collectors. But I do want to point out, and George, you said this probably not in the same way, but there's good and there's bad property data collectors, whether that's an appraiser or someone else. But there's also good and bad appraisers. There's good and bad lenders. There's good and bad AMCs. And so it's being able to, hey, there's good and bad of everything, right? And so the training is key. For us, and this is my role at Class Valuation, is the training. Before somebody ever goes out in the field, they have to take a course, and I can see that they've completed that course and they're proficient. There's also ways to bridge that gap if a property data collector, appraiser or non, is maybe a little green about construction knowledge or doing an inspection. There's ways with technology to bridge that gap. And so our company is very interested in that as well. But, from a deficiency perspective and with the data, what I've seen over the years, a lot of the problems in appraisal originate at the inspection. So there's no formal training for appraisers other than being with a really good supervisory appraiser and having that hands-on right now to be out in the field and to learn and to gather that information. There's no formal training on how to properly measure a home.
Yeah, and maybe that should be, maybe that should be QE. I actually have a course that's coming. I'm only teaching it live right now, but we hope to get it online. It's called the Appraisal Inspection. So it's both bifurcated, hybrid, and more so we're looking at the traditional appraisal inspection, right? Or observation, if you want to call it that way. I tell folks all the time, do you know you have a bomb sitting in your house? I mean, it's not really a bomb, but it's kind of like a bomb. If your water heater doesn't have a safety mechanism on it, it can explode. And there's YouTube videos out there. Go look at Mythbusters. There's a water heater that shoots all the way through the roof of a house and really just destroys the whole house. Well, imagine if somebody was sitting on the couch underneath that thing when it shot off like a rocket, right? So there probably does need to be a discussion of some kind of training for these folks if this is going to happen. Tim asked a question, and then we're at our halfway mark, guys. But Tim asked a question. FHFA has put the brakes on the bifurcation process to some extent. Any thoughts on this potential backpedaling process? Has bifurcation been less successful than the GSEs had hoped? What do you think, Julie?
Is that for me? Well, I think, so Tim, you bring up a good point, and I think it's great to clarify that bifurcation there are no breaks on bifurcation.
Yeah.
I do think that you'll see a formal announcement about that probably in February, but the bifurcated process is still alive and well. The GSEs and FHFA in particular, they are very interested in seeing the results of that. And so of those tests and learns and those pilots. And so, part of that is time savings, and we could go through that. And then also protecting appraiser independence. And then again, with the use of technology, how we can give in that bifurcated process, how we can bridge the gap of knowledge for that PDC, and then also offer more insight into the collateral.
Great. Hey guys, we're at the halfway mark, so I got to do my thing real quick. Everybody watching, thank you for being here. We've still got a half hour, or maybe a little more if we can keep George from jumping off to eat breakfast. You're watching the Appraisal Report webinar brought to you by the fine folks of Appraiser eLearning. Listen, we offer these free of charge. It's typically the fourth Thursday of every month at 10 o'clock Central Standard Time. We record these sessions so you can jump in and watch them at a later time. We had a couple of attorneys on last month. They did a great job. I had Hamp on. We've had John Brennan from the Appraisal Foundation. We've had Jim Park from the Appraisal Subcommittee. We've had John Dingman on. We've had a whole host of folks on, and we encourage you to go back and look at those. If you would like to be on the program, or if you know somebody that would make a good guest, please reach out to us and let us know. We're happy to bring them or at least invite them on. And we just hope that when you need some education, you remember Appraiser eLearning. After all, we're bringing this information to help provide you with what's going on in our industry. We are appraisers. We're passionate about what we do, but we do have to keep our lights on. So please show us a little love once in a while. All right, we still have a lot of show left, and we've got a lot of questions, and I'm going to ask a couple more, and then we're going to just kind of talk the questions and maybe get back to some of these if we can. Jeff, hi, Jeff. Glad you're watching. He was actually on the show too, Jeff Dickstein. Not a question, but a comment. Brian, we have discussed this. Uh-oh, what did we discuss, Jeff? Some appraisers have not taken a 15-hour USPAP in decades and only take the updates. We need appraisers to go back to the meat of USPAP. Jeff, I would agree with that. And it's not the most fun or exciting class to set in. So what I do is I try and show appraisers opportunities. And I'll tell you, the foundation did a really good job in the last update and this one with showing you a sample of a restricted appraisal report at the very back of the 7-hour student guide. Appraisers resist that. I don't know how to do it. It's an opportunity for you, right? You're appraising a property for a homeowner thinking about selling their house. Do they really need a picture of their own house? Crying out loud? They look at it every day. All right, Julie Jones, is there proficiency?
Uh-oh.
Yeah, this is right to you. William, is there proficiency testing or just a course and no tests? I assume this is for a people.
Yeah, so it depends on what the module is. So there is a course on just an overview, so that's more or less packets that you can download and reference. Then there are also courses on, like if they're using our technology for property data collection, there's several modules with proficiency testing, and I'm the one that grades those tests, so yes.
Great. I know Fannie Mae does not require room amenity placement within the sketch, but I think the room placement is important, especially for desktop. And who asked that? Who made that comment? Matt, yeah.
It's like he just sent me a softball right there.
Well, before you get it, I'm going to take it because I was in Las Vegas. I stayed an extra day, not to play, but to take a class. How fun is that?
Sure.
But Fannie Mae was there, and I wanted to hear what Fannie Mae had to say. And so they were talking about this, George, about the PDCs I'm going to get this wrong, so don't anybody quote me or file a complaint with Fannie Mae with me. But they were saying something like the property data collector was going to be getting like 84 data points. They were going to take like 49 photographs. I mean, significantly more than what we as appraisers probably do every day, right? And they were talking about that. The property data collector was going to draw a sketch. This was the question I had. If you draw a sketch and you say bedroom, bedroom, bathroom, living room, kitchen, and a property data collector sends that to me, and I look at it, because they're only reporting facts, I'm going to think, oh, this looks like a typical 2-bedroom, 1-bath, living room, kitchen, George. Whereas if an appraiser had been out there, they might have said, and oh, by the way, to get to the bathroom, you got to go through the first bedroom and then go through the second bedroom to get to the bathroom. So the privacy of not only the first, but the second bedroom is interrupted. They have limited privacy. It may be a functional problem with the layout, you think? Well, how's Fannie Mae going to address that? And Lyle said, well, that's something we're talking about. So he didn't have an answer for that one. And I don't know. So Julie, there's your softball that I took a swing at.
All right, this is a two-parter again. So going back to those new requirements, so whether, whichever GSE that we're talking about, what we are seeing is that those data sets that are coming out are way more robust than what appraisers are reporting on now based on the forms that they fill out. So I'll leave that there as a high level discussion. I completely agree with you about the requirements on sketches. To your point, Brian, you just talked about a clear case of functional obsolescence that, a non-appraiser that's collecting that data may not pick up on or may not comment on. They may pick up on it, but maybe they don't comment on it. And so what has to be done from our perspective is bridging that gap with technology. And so that's where, for us, where 3D scanning has come into play when we have a property data collector out there. So it's not only a mobile app that, asks all the right questions, but then also that 3D scanning automatically renders not only a 3D tour, a property report, thousands of photos after you're done with the inspection, but then also automatically renders a 2D sketch that includes all of the interior rooms, the doorways, the windows, the appliances, counters. It's so much more granular detail than what's being provided right now. I mean, now you have a perimeter sketch and then room placement, and that's it. So we think that the way to bridge that gap is with technology.
Yeah, and if we have time, which again, if you guys can stick around an extra 5 or 10 minutes, I want to go back to that 3D scanning, Julie, because I think that's fascinating. I've seen this much of it, and I don't know if I was supposed to, but I did. And now the cat's out of the bag, and you can kind of talk a little more about that. But let's save that to the very end. George, you also wrote in this, then comes the next economic meltdown. I mean, that's what your closing line was. And I love that. I've got a lot of questions on here, and let me read a couple of them, George, before I get your take on this, okay? Vandy says, I find it fascinating that lenders are lending hundreds of thousands of dollars to a borrower, yet are willing to try and save a few bucks while taking on that amount of risk. Someone else said, until lenders have to manage their own risk, they will continue to push speed and lower appraisal costs. How do we uncouple lenders and the taxpayer bailouts that they receive when the loans go bad? So, we've got a lot of folks here. Steven says default verticals using a 2055 when an interior inspection is not possible, but I'm seeing in some of the bigger lenders, such as, I'll say it, Chase, considering using a limited desktop product. Is this a new trend? If so, what's the risk? So it's all about risk. And George, is your statement and the comments from these folks, are you predicting that with this type of use, it's going to encourage another housing crisis?
I think so. Each crisis I'm old enough that I've been through, I think 4 of them now. They happen about every 10 or 12 years, pretty regularly. Each one has a different flavor and different taste. But here, I'm having a little trouble here because my whole mission is to help prevent the next economic meltdown.
Okay.
And how I draw the lines on a house drawing is not going to change the world. In fact, that technology, like Julie says, absolutely is coming. So the data collection part through that type of technology is going to get stronger and better and easier. I think one of the problems with our profession is that we're focused on the wrong thing. As I mentioned, we're trying to give an opinion of value, which was what USPAP requires us to do. We have to be credible. And if you think about what the definition of credible is, it's worthiness, worthy of belief. So my job as an appraiser is to be believable. And I sometimes think, well, gee, a good qualification for that is be a good used car salesman. And that's part of the problem. And because of the historical nature of where valuation came from the 1930s, which basically we were born out of the 1930s depression. The problem is we're still focused on property analysis, and what appraisers need to be focused on is market analysis. We're still thinking about 3 comps or 6 comps and then doing our market analysis. And I think that's backwards. We need to be focused on markets. And from that, identifying what economists call prediction, predicting the hypothetical value of a sale as of a given date. That comes from market information, not from whether the line was drawn correctly. Now that's a part of the subject property. Sure, that's important. I don't want to underestimate that. But our focus continues to be on individual properties when we need to be focused on, we are market analysts.
Yeah, so I don't care if there's a line drawn at all. In fact, a lot of my floor plan sketches don't exist because I don't communicate them to my client. Depends on what the needs of my client is. If somebody's thinking about selling their house, they know what their floor plan is. I'm not gonna waste my time and waste their money selling them a floor plan, right? And Fannie Mae doesn't require you to draw lines inside anyway. They don't even require you to put labels in there, bedroom, living room. That's not a requirement unless there's functional obsolescence attributable to layout. But we as appraisers do that because that's how we were taught, and we just never change, right? You mentioned kind of when appraising, back in I've got the first book, I think it's the first book written in America on real estate appraisal, 24. Now, I may be wrong. If anybody's watching to prove me wrong, let me know, because I think it's the first one. There's one from an assessor journal that predates this, but 1924. And these guys, George, were identifying the problem. What is the value problem and how can we solve the value problem? And my hat's off. And yeah, technology comes into play. We don't handwrite reports. We certainly don't use a typewriter anymore. And so, as Julie said earlier, if I bring in a young trainee, they're probably more tech savvy than me and might be able to help my business, propel a lot faster than me trying to sit down and learn this stuff. So I don't know, there's a lot of things happening right now. Let's talk about our predictions. Okay, so let's get off of bifurcation for a minute and hybrid for a minute. I do think it's fair to say, you better start embracing technology because it's coming, whether you want it to or not, right? What do you think? Where are we going to be in the next year or 2, or 3 or 4? How many blockbuster videos are out there? There's only one left.
Just the one, yeah.
And it's not because they're making money. Amazon, I think people have heard of them. Netflix, how many times do you see some other disruptor coming on the scene and completely changing the traditional layout? George even mentioned, we need to start looking forward. We need to start using some tools that we have available. So I'll take each one of you. George, what do you think? What do you think the appraisal landscape's going to look like in the next 5 years, or will there even be appraisers?
Well, thank you for asking that, because now you're into my bailiwick. This is what's important to me. First of all, the 8.5 by 14 form is archaic. It's a thing of the past. You know, we're not limited to that. In fact, many people have said that the reason we have 3 comps is because it fits on a piece of paper. And there's another reason for that, and that's that the human brain kind of zonks out after about 4 or 5 or 6. When you have a market that's got 26 competing properties, the human brain doesn't see that. And how we deal with that is through visualization, through graphs, pictures. So I think the form is 90% obsolete, and I think we're going to be going to dashboards. Well, we already do that, but basically we need to start looking at ourselves as modifiers of a data stream. The data stream can be fixed and improved, but mostly we get it off MLS or CoStar, wherever it comes from. And we fix that and make it better and deliver answers that go to our clients, who then plug it into their data stream, and they make decisions and fix and modify that data stream. So basically data has gone from being on paper to being on well, all the data. I know that certainly the Midwest, some of the Midwest states that have non-disclosure states, they still have difficulty gathering all the data. But nevertheless, there is an ideal data set, which is all the properties that competed with the subject property on that data value. That's the ideal we're shooting for. If you go more than that, it's garbage. If you go less than that, you're not getting the accuracy and precision that you might get. Appraisers need to start thinking algorithmically. I almost hate to use that word, algorithmically. When you do a simple regression, the formula is, well, it's really not that difficult, but you don't have to understand it or do it. All you need to know, appraisers need to be modelers. We need to know when to use that regression on that problem. So we need to make modeling decisions. Doing the regression is just not that complex. It's you push a button and you get an answer. Knowing the relationship of the input to the output, that requires judgment. And I write a blog every week, and I often get, well, no, no computer is ever going to replace my eyes and brain. I agree with that. But here's the thing: the judgment is different today than it was 20 years ago, and it's going to be much more different 5 and 10 years from now. And appraisers need to know how to sharpen and get better at the judgment and using algorithms and visuals, we need to be in control of the computer. We need to be in control of the algorithms. And that's what I teach in my classes. Well, I mean, it's very specialized.
And if somebody wants more information, I'll let you close with that before we get off of here, because somebody might be interested in taking one of your classes and get more insight on regression.
If I could just add one more thing to that.
You bet.
And you know, given the things I just said, we can provide a heck of a lot more than an opinion of value 2 weeks ago. We can provide a fundamental value, a sustainable value. We can do forecasting 3 months, a year out for clients. We can move towards reproducible work where it truly becomes science compliant. You can do an appraisal. I can come back 8 months later and get exactly the same result. That's possible with today's software technology and economics technology. This is what we need to move towards. If we continue just providing an opinion of value, trust me, trust me, trust me. What USPAP requires, you got to remember, USPAP only has 2 requirements for scope of work. And that's, does everybody do it? And is this what your clients want?
Yeah. What your peers do. I think that's one thing we ought to change in USPAP. Don't you teach your children now, don't do that just because everybody else is doing it. Don't give in to peer pressure. But yet now we're saying give in to peer pressure.
Exactly.
And I'm not crazy about that. You mentioned judgment, how science is important to utilize as a tool. Right? Regression is important to utilize as a tool. But good judgment, you're not going to replace that. And one of my favorite authors in the appraisal world was Dr. Sanders Kahn, PhD. And throughout his writings, you can find him say, judgment is the appraiser's sharpest tool. It's the sharpest tool in your toolbox. So I would echo that and agree with you. Miss Julie Jones, what are we going to be doing in, 3, 4, 5 years? Do I need to find a new job, or appraisers still going to be around and be relevant?
Well, Brian, I'm sorry for you. You're not going to get the fight between me and George that you want, because he and I completely agree on a lot of these topics. Completely agree on, forms, going away, and us saying, data, like what do we do with that data? What's that output look like, and the use of dashboards, et cetera. I think this all ultimately goes back to the consumer. Consumers have a digital demand of speed and accuracy, but they still want that human experience. And so I think that goes through all stakeholders in the process. So are appraisers going away? Absolutely not. But one thing that we have to consider is, since 2011, we have been getting more and more data over the years, right? It's just aggregating. And so what we do with that data is what's most important. So there's always going to be a place for appraisers when they responsibly use that data and the technology. I think we're going to see more stakeholders in the process having access to that data. Where that's going to come from, I don't know. But we have so much. I think we can predict that appraisers are going to start to see more of that data as well, where they haven't seen it aggregated in the past. They have access to it, but not in an aggregated fashion. Increased use of mobile apps, any kind of technology, just to kind of bridge gaps. That really, if you think about, the data in forms right now is standardized. I think, especially if we want to bridge a gap of training with, new appraisers or someone else perhaps that's doing that property data collection, you have to be able to do the inspection in a standardized way. It has to almost look the same way every time to get that repetition and get that expertise. And so I think we're going to see more of that, more transparency, more credibility into the appraisal itself. As George said, just providing an opinion of value for appraisers is not going to be enough. Using the comment of, I've been in this market for 20 years and this is my professional opinion, is not enough. You have to support that with data and analysis.
Yeah, my favorite line is folks that say, well, I've been doing this 40 years. And I say, well, okay, but let's just imagine for a minute, what if you were trained an improper technique? I mean, what if you were trained to do something the wrong way? Wouldn't you just have 40 years of experience doing it the wrong way? And so, that's really a cop out. And I'm not trying to belittle anybody that's studied a market and done that for 40 years. I tip my hat to that. Things definitely changed for the last 10 years, right? When I was in Chicago, we had comp books. There was no MLS that you could get on. We have comp books this big, and you had to just flip them by page, right? Then you had to go into a realtor's office and get the most recent active listing to find maybe a couple of comps in the back. We've come a long way, and we've got a long way to go. So real quick, I want to ask you about the 3D scanning. And then after you talk a little bit about this 3D scanning, I want to give my prediction. And I want to get George and Julie's response to my predictions. Okay. So before we do that, Julie, you mentioned 3D scanning. What is that?
I see that we're short on time, and I want to be respectful of everybody's time. So I'll give kind of the quick and dirty. Last year, we invested in a company called Inside Maps for 3D property scanning. There's a couple of different devices to go out there and implement this. One is like a little robot that sits on a tripod. The other is a 3D camera. And then you all you navigate the camera or the robot with your phone. It has to be an Apple or an iPad. But it just ultimately, it stitches the property together for you. So you're going in, you're scanning, you're saying, I'm in the living room, now I'm in the bedroom. What was the last connecting room? So the output of that 3D scanning, you get the 3D tour. There's a detailed property report that's giving, average height of the ceiling at a room level, the type of ceiling, number of fixtures, number of windows and doors, et cetera, volume of rooms, so really granular information. Also, again, automatically collecting 192 images per scan per room. So just a wealth of information. We truly believe it's the next frontier. We want to see it as the new standard in data collection or inspection. And so we've got lots of ways that we can incorporate that as a standalone for appraisers to import into their appraisal, or also using our mobile app doing that.
And you guys are using that now? You're using that technology now out in the field to gather data?
We are.
Okay.
Yep.
So if an appraiser watching is like, hey, I want one of those cool tools, do they have access to that or no?
They do. I mean, you can, if you don't want to do work for class valuation, you're more than welcome to go buy the camera online. It does come with upload fees. So you would have to incorporate that into the fee of your appraisal, I'm sure. If you do work for class valuation, there are no fees associated with it. And in certain markets where we're just trying to test the technology, we're providing those cameras to our appraisers as well.
Very cool. Well, I'll let you give your contact information before we get off here if anybody's interested in getting some more information. I know you've done a few webinars on that topic as well, and unfortunately I haven't been able to watch that, but I plan on it. Okay, so here's my prediction. Are you ready? I'm probably wrong. I'm wrong a lot. I'm good at being wrong, but this is what I think. Will it happen this year? Probably not. Will it happen in 5 years? Maybe. So I will say this before I give my prediction. I want everyone watching to understand that most things change. Not all things, but I said most things change. And if you don't believe that statement, look in the mirror. Things are going to change whether you want them to or not, right? The guy that had the 1 hour photo lab that would develop his film for you, you go pick it up after 2 hours and tape it on your report. Well, if he didn't modify his business model, he's out of business today. The gentleman that right down the street from where I'm broadcasting right now, who did modify his business model to start selling digital cameras and start processing it. And back then, if you dropped your camera, you took it to Eddie and prayed he could fix it, because those cameras were expensive, right? He has a thriving business right now. He will convert your videotape over to digital. He'll do whatever you want him to do in the digital realm, if you will. He saw the change coming and he adapted. I may be completely wrong here, but I think the real estate industry is about to be disrupted, and I think the appraisal is next. We live in a society now of this, right? Everybody likes to type. They don't like to talk on the phone, and they don't like to see each other socially. When's the last time you was at a restaurant, 4 people were sitting on a table and they were doing this? You see it all the time. I was just at a graduation and these 21-year-old, 22-year-old young ladies behind me said, we like to have a cocktail or 2 or 3 before we even go out to the party because we're just so anxious. We have so much anxiety in it. That's the world we live in. You can get a pizza delivered to you and they're cooking it on the way to your house. Netflix, you know, the streaming cable business is about to, how many of you have a home telephone right now? You know, things change. So I think what's going to happen on the real estate side is the real estate agents a lot of them are going to go away. It's a tough business. I am an agent now as well. And we have door openers. So George, you want to buy a house? Let me know when you pull up and I'll send a door opener over. And then when you're ready for your offer, you can text the agent at the corporate office in Chicago and they'll write the offer for you, right? And then it's going to evolve from, instead of a door opener coming, because you don't want to be around anybody, we'll buzz you in. You go on in. I think the appraisal community is going to have some sort of property data collection in the future. I think it's inevitable. I think it's going to happen. I'd love for it to be appraisers. Maybe those watching, it's a great time to open a PDC company. I don't know, something to think about. But then with the technology, just like as Julie described, this thing that'll scan everything and put where the windows are, and talk about where the refrigerator is and what type it is and what the life expectancy it has, I mean, you're going to be able to get so much data at your fingertips. Like George can do a scattered graph and see how the market is behaving. You're going to be able to get big data in every aspect of that home at your fingertips. So I think it's going to go from a PDC to eventually a homeowner is going to capture data and upload it to the cloud. And then you're going to be asked to do a desktop on those. I may be completely wrong, but I doubt it. So George, what say you? Am I just living in a fantasy world, or what do you think is going to happen in the next 5 years?
It's all about attitude. Attitude. You mentioned the word disrupt, and I agree with you completely. In fact, people are saying we're going to be disrupted. No, we're already disrupted.
True.
There's two attitudes you can take towards that, or we can take towards that, or I can take towards that. I can say, wow, this is a problem. I hate this. How can I avoid this change? Or I can open my eyes, say, wow, there's got to be opportunity here. And there are things, you know, we appraisers and human behaviors, we tend to underestimate how much we know about things that we know nothing about, and we tend to overestimate. We underestimate our body of knowledge, and we as appraisers actually do a pretty darn good job of what we do. It's a huge opportunity. There's other professions, other people cannot do some of the. We know our markets, our attitudes, our education. We need to build. So don't look at it as a problem. Say, wow, this might be an opportunity. What do I do today to be set for the future, so I can make more money, so I can take care of my family, so I can be of service to my community, so I can feel good about myself. That's really what I'm about. You know, I'm semi-retired, and that's why I love teaching. I see an opportunity here, not only for us as individuals, but truly be there for the public trust, as USPAP and our professional organizations say.
Very good. Hey, ladies and gentlemen, if you haven't read the book, Who Moved My Cheese by Spencer Johnson, MD, get that book and read it. We resist change. Have you ever met someone that's been married for 40 years and they can't stand one another? Or they've worked a job for 30 years and you say, you must love it there now. I've hated it the last 29 years. Well, why still there? Well, job, right? We resist change, but change is coming. Julie, where are we going to be 5 years from now?
You know what? So again, no surprise here. I agree with George. But I want to make a comment on that resistance to change, because it's not what I'm seeing at all. I think that the squeaky wheels are the ones that do resist change, but I think those are few and far between. As I have seen in my outreach with our appraisers and appraisers that are not on our panel, they are not resistant to change. And you know what? They're freaking tired of being told that they're resistant to change. You know, I certainly take a positive route of, you know, one of two things is going to happen when you tell someone they can't do something. The worst possible outcome is that they believe you and they walk away entirely. The other scenario is that they don't believe you. They get angry. They're resistant to your comment about them being resistant to change. And then you know what? Then they go work with a partner that's going to bring them along and tell them how to adapt and teach them and bring them along for that change. And so that's the approach I want to take. Our innovation panel has tripled this past year. And so I'm really encouraged by that. I know that there are a bulk of appraisers out there that are really excited about technology. There's cool stuff out there, and it doesn't take away from, you know, the expertise or, you know, your 20 years out in the field. It doesn't take away from that. It aids that. It helps that. It makes you stronger.
Very cool. You know, one of the things that I told George just the other night, I said, I don't think appraisers are ever going to go away. We're trying to do something that, in my opinion, a computer can't do. Regression can help us. It's a cool tool. Big data can help us. The 3D scan can help us. We're at the end of the day, we're trying to measure something that's immeasurable. We do the best job we can with the data we have, but we're trying to measure human behavior. And boy, that's constantly changing, isn't it? Hey, thank you both for being here. Julie Jones, if someone wants to reach out to you and pick your, or talk to you, or find out where you're going to be, or maybe ask you about this 3D scan thing, how can somebody communicate with you?
It's super easy. You can either find me on LinkedIn, or my email address is jjones@classvaluation.com.
Very good. Thank you so much for being here. George Dell, if someone is interested in taking one of your classes,
Well,
in taking one, or maybe
Everyone should take a George Dell class.
yeah, or maybe getting on your blog, or just wanting to see where you're going to be in live action, how can somebody reach out to you, George?
Well, thank you. You gave me permission to put this one slide up. I don't know if everybody sees it's kind of big and green. This is basically what I do. I have a free blog. It's about change. About change, opportunity, and new skills. And basically, that's real easy to get on. It's free. I've been doing it for over 3 years. I've not missed a week. Comes out every Tuesday. georgedell.com. That's easy. I also have a paid asset analyst report. It's the TAR.
George, if you want to put that slide up, hit your share button down at the bottom, that green button down at the bottom. You can share.
Okay. Oh, yes.
Ben,
thank you.
Ben, if you're around. Oh, I think you got it, George. There you go. You got it.
Okay, but I've lost my slide.
We can see it.
Yeah, we see it. Blog on opportunity.
Okay, you got the TAR thing up now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, well, that's basically more in depth. It comes out 12 to 15 times a year. The last one was 14 pages long on adjustments, on the 3 types of adjustments you and I talked about on your discussion. $199 a year. Also have the primary classes, stats, graphs, and data science 1. We have 2 or 3 other classes, but this is the primary one, teaching it all over the country, Miami, Ohio. We're moving east in particular this year. We've had a lot of people kind of bugging me for that. It's 14 hours, hands-on, laptop required. We teach evidence-based valuation as compared to trust me based valuation, in particular on the market analysis and what's competitive. So there's the areas that we're kind of moving into. And then in September in Detroit, we had a formational meeting of the community of asset analysts. And basically, the trend of the idea there is that we can sell more than just an opinion of value. We can sell reliability and risk and forecasts and real-time valuation down. Once the data set's set up, you can do real-time valuation, make good money very quickly on that. That is by invitation only, requires coming to my classes. If anybody wants the TAR report, the one time only till midnight tonight, $60 off, so it's $139.95 instead of $200.
Nice.
Go on to my website, georgedell.com. You'll have to find the spot where you sign up. Use this code. It's only good for people who are on this webinar today, not your friends and relatives and neighbors. Only for you. TAAR 2019 $60. I'd love to have a couple of people come and do that. I think you'll get value out of that. Thank you very much for having me on here.
Very good, very good. And George, you can go ahead and hit that stop share, or Ben, you can take care of that for me. Again, Miss Julie Jones and Mr. George Dell, thank you both so much for being here. Ladies and gentlemen, you've been watching the Appraisal Report webinar brought to you by Appraiser eLearning. For George Dell and Julie Jones, I'm Bryan Reynolds, your host. Thank you very much for being here, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so